administration is in the process of implementing substantial policy changes in 4 distinct areas: trade, immigration, fiscal policy, and regulation. Our monetary policy stance is well positioned to deal with the risks and uncertainties we face as we gain a better understanding of the policy changes and their likely effects on the economy. It is not our role to comment on those policies. Rather, we make an assessment of their likely effects, observe the behavior of the economy, and set monetary policy in a way that best achieves our dual mandate goals. We have stressed that it will be very difficult to assess the likely economic effects of higher tariffs until there is greater certainty about the details, such as what will be tariffed, at what level, and for what duration, and the extent of any retaliation from our trading partners. While uncertainty remains elevated, it is now becoming clear that tariff increases will be significantly larger than expected. And the same is likely to be true of the economic effects, which will include higher inflation and slower growth. The size and duration of these effects remains uncertain. While tariffs are highly likely to generate at least a temporary rise in inflation, it's also possible that the effects could be more persistent. Avoiding that outcome would depend on keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored, on the size of the effects, and on how long it takes for them to pass through fully to prices. Our obligation is to keep longer-term inflation expectations well anchored, and to make certain that a one-time increase in the price level does not become an ongoing inflation problem. We'll continue to carefully monitor the incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. We're well positioned to wait for greater clarity before considering any adjustments to our policy stance. It is too soon to say what will be the appropriate path for monetary policy. We understand the benefits of a solid economy where workers can find jobs and inflation is low and predictable. We also understand that elevated levels of unemployment or inflation can be damaging and painful for communities, families, and businesses. That is why we at the Fed will continue to do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Most importantly, thank you for being here. This feels like quite a moment to be speaking with you, and I want to thank you for your time. He's got it. I want to thank you for being here, and thank you for group of business journalists. Also like to give a special thanks to Heather Long with the Washington Post, who helped make this event possible. So for starters, sir, how's your week been?
Just fine, thank you.
Care to elaborate?
So far, so good.
Chair Powell, yes, thank you so much for being here and taking our questions. You were talking about the economy as being a very strong economy. You characterized inflation as coming down, employment as being very strong still. However, President Trump earlier this week, when asked about the market volatility we've been seeing, said the volatility was, quote, to be expected. This is a patient that was very sick. We inherited a terrible economy. A lot of voters did and do agree with that assessment, or at least in part. I'm wondering how you would respond to that assessment and the disconnect between the story of the data and the way a lot of people are feeling about the economy.
Sure. So let me just be clear at the start. I make it a practice not to respond to any elected officials' comments. So I don't want to be seen to be doing that. It's just not appropriate for me. But the situation, I think, is this, and people, when they're surveyed, they are unhappy about the economy. That seems to largely reflect the increase in the price level that happened when inflation was high, 2021, 22, and 23 largely. Inflation is now back down to much more normal levels. Unemployment is low, the economy has been growing, but people are still experiencing that high price level. In other words, prices don't go down. They know they're paying much more for the basic necessities of life, and they're right that they are, and they're not happy about it, and they're right not to be happy about it. So I think that accounts for the negative sentiment. We, of course, we're looking at inflation, which is the change in prices, and we're seeing that has come down quite a bit, and that, you know, unemployment is actually low. It's sort of very close to measures of maximum employment. and the economy's growing. So all those statistics are good, but the price increases of the past few years are weighing on people's budgets.
So I'm from Milwaukee, and I've been talking to business leaders, executives, and consumers in our community, in our region, for the last few weeks, mostly before this week's news. Chairman, they're troubled and they're nervous. One business owner told me, if there's a hint of a recession, we're cooked. And he asked me to share that with you. What's your response?
So I guess I would say, let's start with the fact that the incoming data right through this morning's employment report, which admittedly is from roughly a month ago, the week of March 12, they took the data in. It still shows us a solid economy. Unemployment's still low. I understand the uncertainty that's weighing on people. You ask about a recession. We don't make a probability forecast of how likely it is for there to be a recession, but many outside forecasters do, and many of them have raised the likelihood, albeit from very low levels. It's not something that anybody now is forecasting, or some people are starting to. And so there's not much more I can say about that. I realize that the uncertainty is high, and what we've learned is that the tariffs are higher than anticipated, higher than almost all forecasters predicted. We still don't know where that comes to rest, though, and we're just going to have to see that through.
At a congressional hearing last year, one of the U.S. representatives said that you were pretty boring, and you thanked him and said that you considered that a very high compliment. And in fact, I feel like it's one of the roles of the Federal Reserve, especially since the housing crisis, to be kind of a ballast, especially in the face of the volatility of the markets and the dramatics that we can experience with the economy. Very steady, no surprises, very reliable. In a moment like this, which also has a lot of drama and unpredictability, but it is not necessarily from an economic crisis. It's by design, it's political. How do you see your role in this moment?
So I think all of the values that you touched on are, in fact, the values that we try to live by. We're driven by, analysis and careful thought and discussion and debate and the merits of things. We try to stay as far as we can from the political process. We don't look at political cycles or things like that. So, and I think people expect that from us. They expect us to tell the truth, and that's what we're going to do. But at the same time, we don't want to be part of the broader political discussion about the wisdom of policies that are not assigned to us. We're not responsible for trade policy, immigration policy, fiscal policy. So we don't comment on those. Decisions are made by others, and what we do is we use our tools to try to achieve the goals that Congress assigned us, which is maximum employment and price stability. So I like to think that over time we're a source of calm, rational analysis and also of stability. That's really what the business that we're in is providing: financial and macroeconomic stability to the public. That's really our purpose.
So how can businesses and individuals and the Fed make plans for the future when so much is being dictated by the actions of a single person? And do you see yourself as the consoler in chief on economic matters?
No, I think, take a step back. What's happening is, as I mentioned, the new administration is making significant policy changes in trade, immigration, fiscal policy, and regulation. And you're still just a couple of months into the administration, and that process will take place. And at a certain point, the new policies will be on the table. They will be having the effects they're going to have on the economy, and uncertainty will decline. Right now, there's a lot of uncertainty about where all that's going to sort out, the forms it will take, and what the economic effects will be. If you fast forward a year from now, the uncertainty should be much lower. The actual effects of the policies should then be pretty manifest and clear. So I think I understand why it just is highly uncertain, both what the policies will turn out to be, exactly what they'll turn out to be, and also what their effects will be in the near term. We just have to go through that process, and it is just kind of a manifestation of our election cycle and a new administration coming in with new policies.
I mean, given the all of the change happening and the fact that we are in a period where things have not settled in yet, and that the Federal Reserve and you as chair are very projection, data-driven, policy-driven. How do you handle a moment like now? I mean, can you tweak your plans and projections? Do you just kind of, do you have to reset them?
So, what we've had since in the last few months is from the staff has been a placeholder. Rather, they wouldn't call it a forecast because it's so uncertain. They call it a placeholder. And that's kind of how we've been thinking about it. So it's a good time to take a step back and let things clarify. That's why it's just too soon to say what the appropriate monetary policy response will be to these new policies. It is just too soon to say. We can't say with any confidence today. So that's what we're doing. We've taken a step back and we're watching to see what the policies turn out to be and the ways in which they will affect the economy. And then we'll be able to act. Fortunately, our policy stance is in a good place for us to do that. We're probably moderately restrictive, let's say. So it's not really tight policy, but which is appropriate since inflation is a bit above target. So we think we're well positioned to address whatever may come. And in the meantime, I'd say we're waiting for greater clarity before we consider adjustments.
Business owners in Wisconsin have told me that they can't make their plans. They want to expand. They want to build a new facility. They want to hire or do whatever the future calls for. They say, we're trying to look around the corner. We're not even sure where the corner is, and we're not even sure what's around the corner. Sounds like they're in the same position as you are a little bit.
No, we hear the same thing. Of course, we have an incredible network of contacts with businesses and also universities, nonprofits, all different sectors through the reserve banks and also through the Board of Governors. And that's what we hear. But again, it's a process. We're going through it, and I think we will know when we know what the policies are exactly and what their implications will be for the economy. That will all become clear, and I think that'll be a time when people can make decisions. In the meantime, though, I get it. We're hearing that a lot from people, and we are kind of in the same place, which is waiting for clarity about what our policy path should be. We'll have to see.
Yeah.
As you're talking about placeholders right now and having something in the place when there's so much that we don't know, it does occur to me that this is not the first economic shock that you have steered the markets and the economy through. Obviously, there was COVID almost exactly 5 years ago. It seems similar in certain ways with a lot of uncertainty, a lot of shock, also potential disruptions to prices and to supply, which is very much in the Federal Reserve's wheelhouse. I mean, from where you sit, can Liberation Day be compared to kind of the economic effects of COVID? Are they totally different, somewhat related?
I think each situation is different. There was COVID. There was also then, in the response to COVID, then there was high inflation, and then there was soft landing, and now we have new administration and changes in policies. And every situation, it kind of rhymes, but it's not exactly the same thing. And so in this situation, what we face is what I mentioned in my remarks is you actually have risks for higher unemployment and higher inflation, and that's difficult for a central bank because our tools, which consist of interest rates, either slow down or speed up the economy over time. And higher unemployment would call for speeding up the economy, and higher inflation would call for slowing it down. So you can be in a situation, if we find ourselves in that situation, we look at how far each of the two variables is from its goal, and we ask ourselves, how long would it take to get back? And we weigh those things and make a decision about what to do. But there's no question that's a different situation, very difficult situation. When we faced high inflation, it was painful for the country, painful for the people that we serve, but we knew what policy needed to be. We knew we needed to raise rates quite a bit. During the pandemic, we knew what we needed to do. It was very clear the direction that we needed to take with force, and we did.
It's almost a situation potentially where the dual mandate is at odds with itself.
The two goals are, as we say, in tension, or they may be. I'd say that's not what we're seeing right now, but it's the effects at the margin right now would be for higher inflation and perhaps higher unemployment, but that's a marginal effect. I would say you're not in a situation like we were in the 1970s, where the two goals were really both pulling in opposite directions and required. That's where, it's just very hard for a central bank to be the answer to a situation like that. That's not the situation we're really in today.
One of the questions from the audience that we had is, if unemployment takes off and inflation takes off, which lever do you go for? Which lever do you, what do you do?
So we actually have we have a document called our consensus statement, or the longer version is Statement on Longer Run Goals and Monetary Policy Strategy. And the 6th paragraph of that actually contemplates when the two goals are in tension. And what it says is, think about how far each variable is from its goal, and think about how long it would take for each to get back. So in a way, it's an equation. You're comparing two quantities, which each have two variables. And then you say, you look at that and you think, what do we need to do? And typically this doesn't happen very often, but if one of them is further away, then you would focus on that one. In the case of high inflation, they actually both pointed in the same direction. The labor market was overheated and inflation was very high. So both of those called for, for tight monetary policy. This could be different, but again, we're not actually facing that today.
I feel like there's another tension inherent in your job, which is that you're looking at the macro economy, at the global economy really, and the US places in it, but also the data you're looking at is very profoundly human, as Jim has been pointing out. Jobs, I think, and prices are probably the two most human pieces of data, and certainly in our day-to-day experience, probably the things that loom the largest. How do you reconcile those two things when you're looking at the data, like both the global markets and knowing that the data represents a lot of lives and jobs and egg prices and things like that?
So I think at the Fed, we always keep a focus on the people that we serve, and we know and are very conscious daily that the things that we do have a real effect on people's lives. We know that, and it really does focus the mind. And I think if you talk to people at the Fed, there's a very strong commitment to serving the public as well as we possibly can. Economic events are just very, very unpredictable at times, and there are shocks that you can't see coming. But nonetheless, our job is to, whatever happens, use our tools to bring the economy back to stability, back to price stability, back to maximum employment. And that's what we do. But you're right. We try to keep everybody in the room with us when we're thinking about what to do.
So in response to the last round of tariffs, Harley-Davidson, which is based in Milwaukee, moved some production to Thailand. Now the company might be whipsawed again by the new tariffs. It could be really devastating for sales, for employment, for the future of that company. But a lot of companies are in that same position. And what do you say to companies like Harley-Davidson and their workers?
So it just isn't, I really want to stick to our knitting. I mean, we have this great thing called our independence of monetary policy, and that's critical for us to be able to do our job. But for us to keep that independence, we need to not succumb to the temptation to want to be a player on issues that are not assigned to us. And trade policy is one of those. There are many, many issues that people love to try to pull us in on, almost every issue really. And we just need to stick to our knitting, not get pulled into those things. And so trade policy is a classic one. Energy policy is another. Climate change, many immigration is not really, although all of those things have economic implications and it gets argued that way. But if we treated those as our job, the case for our independence would disappear. So I really can't comment on, we hear the same stories like that, but honestly, the policymakers who are charged with that, they're probably hearing the same stories too, and they're reaching a judgment about what's in the best interest of the country in the long run. That's what they are doing, I guess, and that's, so it's not for us to comment on that.
What happens inside the Fed at a moment like right now, when there's so much change and quite a bit of uncertainty, when you're watching things unfold? What does that look like, practically speaking? What are people doing inside the building?
So I'm very proud to work with the people I work with. I can tell you that in times like this, or times like the pandemic, where the global financial markets were shutting down, the global economy was shutting down, people step forward and they say, "We've got this." These are career people who were here for the global financial crisis. They've got 25 years, 35 years of experience with crises, and they step forward and it's just incredible what they can do and how good they are. It's a great honor to work with them. So right now isn't that situation. We have the situation we have. So, our trade people and our inflation people and our macroeconomists are all working hard to kind of digest the news of this week and try to filter that into the forecast that they'll make. And policymakers are doing very much the same thing. And we're reading everything we can about what's happening and lots of outside analysis too. We don't have an FOMC meeting until May 6 and 7. So that's really a process that lasts several weeks, and we're not quite at that stage yet. But we're kind of thinking ahead to that and working through all of that. I will say though, it feels like we don't need to be in a hurry. It feels like we have time
Really?
to, yes, it feels like we don't. No, I mean, it's like I said, you have inflation is going to be moving up and growth is going to be slowing, but it isn't really, to me, it's not clear at this time what the appropriate path for monetary policy will be. And we're going to need to wait and see how this plays out before we can start to make those adjustments.
Question from the audience. One of our SABU members is, are you in contact with other central bankers in other countries at a time like this?
Yes, pretty frequently. Absolutely, I am. And the same was true during the other crises I've been through. Not only that, though, we do meet very regularly. The IMF World Bank meetings here in Washington twice a year. We go to Basel multiple times a year to meet. That's all central bankers. And there are also G20 meetings, G7 meetings where the central bankers are there. So we're kind of regularly meeting and talking. And when we're not doing that, we're also texting each other.
Is there a group chat?
I'm not at liberty to say. No, no, there's not.
And have you talked to those central bankers this week?
Recently, yeah, I didn't want to get too specific about this, but yes, I have.
What's their sentiment? Can you characterize that?
I'd rather, again, I don't comment on what my international colleagues say, or it's not appropriate. But we're talking about events. We're talking about the implications for the economy. We're discussing what we're hearing from markets and from business people and for from the elected governments too. It's all the things you would expect us to be talking about on a regular basis. It's one of the best things about this role is that the central banks have a lot. We're all non-political, so we think about things in quite similar ways, and they're real bonds. We're not lobbying each other ever on policy. It's just never. That's just not a thing, because we do our policy here, they do their policy there, but we develop really, really good relationships and bonds with them. It's one of the real pleasures and benefits being able to talk about this, just not only with the great people at the Fed, but also with the leaders around the world.
I mean, it's interesting because it is a job of enormous responsibility and power, but it's also a job. How would you characterize the job of Fed chair? Like, how is it as a job?
Honestly, that's what it is. I really feel just like another person doing that job.
Really?
Yeah.
You just like.
That's how it is. I'm doing a job. I have a job to do. I actually really like the job. I like it a lot. I enjoy it. It can be stressful at times. Nonetheless, incredibly interesting, great people to work with, really important. What more could you want? But that's what it is. And, I'm blessed by working with great colleagues who are really committed to getting it right. I mean, fully appreciate how important it is that we get it right. And do everything we possibly can to bring the best thinking, the best analysis, and debate things, over and over until we feel like we're in the right place. At the same time, there is no certainty in this. You can be wrong because the economy can zig when you thought it was going to zag.
So your term as Fed chair ends about a year from now. What do you think about your job security?
I fully intend to serve all of my term.
Excellent. I mean, as we're getting close to wrapping up, I did want to ask something a little bit out of the box. I think because
All right, we'll go live now. I'll bring Howard in here a little bit, but you heard Powell talking about it right now. He says he's not in a hurry. Look, that very much tells me exactly what's happening, that he are not in a rush to cut rates. And I think that's bad. But you're now seeing 3.951 on the 10-year. And of course, you're seeing gold 30.22 now an ounce. Markets aren't liking this much because they're saying no rate cut. He's saying, look, market uncertainty around the tariffs is a big problem. And look, I got to bring Howard in on this, but Howard, this is not a Fed that seems to be in control. They say they like their independence. He says he's going to be in there till the end of his term. But to me, this is telling me everything I need to know, that he is not interested in cutting rates. He says he's not in a hurry. He wants to see what it goes. He says he does not feel like he needs to be in a hurry. I keep seeing that over and over and over again. Wants to stick to our knitting of independence is critical for Fed. I agree with that. We heard that from Michael Litt last week, but not in a hurry, does not understand. Is he not he says he's in contact with other central banks, but is he in contact with the White House at least?
I mean, it's, my key at the beginning, I kept writing stability because that's what he kept talking about. Price stability. He was calm. But the thing that, everybody's covering and that you hear is, we're in no rush. That, I think that was the takeaway that I just got out of it was, he tried to just say the sky was, I think he tried to reassure the markets, but I don't know that it worked. It didn't. I mean, the market started to move a little bit. If I, share my screen here. Give me 1 second, actually, here.
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin stuck around it at the 83,000 handle. Nothing happened there. We saw NVIDIA pumping a little bit earlier on that Vietnam news. Obviously, Nike went green on NVIDIA on the Nike news in Vietnam. And still higher by 4.35% in the green. It should be okay with Apple because they do make products in Vietnam. But Powell pretty much we're now hearing from Goldman Sachs that hedge funds on Thursday yesterday, while we did see the retail literally buy at $4 trillion worth, a Goldman Sachs note now says that on Thursday, the net equity selling basis there was the largest one-day amount since 2010. Wow.
So what does that mean? The hedge funds were the guys at the door, where you wanted to be, Steve, right?
Yeah, and I think that the hedge funds, the protection against this sell-off, this is actually a very positive note to me, that they said that they're taking their protection off a little bit. Their hedges are being pulled off. This could be very interesting here. Look, the Powell said it at least 5 times that we have a dual mandate, price protection, price stability, and jobs, right? Okay, those are your 2 mandates, all right? He says that we usually go after the one that's been hit the hardest. Okay, well, you're now seeing unemployment slipping. You're now seeing job layoffs picking up, and you're now seeing this price protection or inflation still going up, and he doesn't like inflation. And so Powell has been banged over the head by Trump saying, look, we need to lower rates or I'm going to do it myself. And he did. He did it with these tariff talk.
Rates.
Rates are lower, yeah.
That he did. 10-year 3.94 right now. So
we're now seeing, looks like the NASDAQ now probably pretty much on the lows today here, I think, again.
Yeah, it's pretty close. 431.88. It was down at 426.10. But we're headed back.
Yeah,
you can see it double topped here at this 434.64 on the 1 minute chart. If it doesn't hold, it's head back.
Yeah, I think one of the Powell's speeches was talking about was unemployment and the employment rate, and I really want to bring in my friend Paul Balella into the show today, because I think I want to hear it from his perspective of what's really going on. So let's bring Paul in here. Paul Balella, CEO, founder of Higher Capital out of DC area, man. Paul, welcome to the show, and coming out, man. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing on the employment route.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's a lot of tumultuous stuff going on here in DC, where I am right now. And what we took a look at this morning was the employment report, and
Yep.
it was kind of surprising, but there's always a lag on these things, So what do we have? Over 200,000 jobs created, much higher than expected. Slight bump to 4.2, still a really full employment number in the unemployment percentage. Participation rate holding in there. I mean, a lot of news that candidly was a little surprising and more positive than anticipated.
What was surprising about it? I mean, Powell again today reiterated that he has a dual mandate, that it's price stability and it's employment. He said something very interesting. When one of them gets out of whack, the more that we focus on that, right? So you're saying that employment's okay right now. We're still at full employment, but then he's saying that inflation is still high, so he's not in a hurry to lower rates.
That's right. Yeah, kind of the I don't know. It's a less than Goldilocks situation, to be honest, based on the way the economy is.
Is it because we're looking backwards on these reports?
Yeah.
I'd have to ask too, Paul. Is this lag? One of the reasons we're so excited to have you is these numbers look in the rearview mirror while we drive a car very fast right now forward. And what are you seeing out there when it comes to that? Is it matching these numbers, especially in DC, where we know Doge layoffs? I have a few friends that said that they might get notified, this today, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't match up, and it's not. I'm looking also beyond DC, but DC is sort of the epicenter of the problem. We talk about layoffs. What did I have? I had a number for you here. Layoffs and furloughs in the federal government were 216,000 in March. Those are not yet reflected because they really haven't transpired yet. So they're happening over the next 4 to 6 weeks, and I hope there's not a lot more to come, but it does appear that there could be. Here's what I'm seeing, and I think the essence of it, as I dug into the numbers, I see same old, things. Healthcare, way up, 56,000, I think. Some of the other service areas are improving. We've got areas. The government was only off, I think, 4,000 or 5,000 in this report. So you can see there's hundreds of thousands.
200 ahead.
Yeah. And, everything about the report looked very, what I would say is sort of normal economic times, very, positive. But it's all forthcoming. We got this issue with it's not just the federal government. Okay. Here's where I see, and I know that I shared this with you all in a session we had a few months ago. Healthcare, some of the service areas and retail. It used to be the government, and now that's coming off. But those are okay. What isn't okay is the professional area. The area where technology, accounting, operations specialists, these are folks, maybe in the prime of their career, 10 to 20 years of experience. That's the hardest part of this market. I know that's a sweet spot of higher capital on our employment services side. And we're seeing just a lot of withdrawal of jobs into our slow processes, very careful and precise hiring. And that builds up. It's been going on for months and months, and it builds up and it winds up showing itself in the data eventually. There's only so much healthcare can hold us up, and the government piece is probably going to fade for a bit. And so it's worrisome. So I think that the numbers and the data, we know the Fed is very dependent on this, are showing you something that is definitely, as Stephen said, looking in the rearview mirror. I think some bad stuff's coming, and I hate to say it. And maybe there'll be some adjustment on the policy that will resurrect this. But I think we'll see some tough reports in the months ahead.
And that's cool. Powell just said, he's hearing a lot from businesses that they're waiting for clarity to make decisions.
That's right.
But yet you've heard a lot of businesses saying, hey, we're going to move back to the United States, or we're going to make these decisions. A lot of companies have already made those decisions. Apple made a decision to move to Vietnam. Nike went to Vietnam to make shoes. We've heard from SoftBank, so they're going to put $200 billion into the United States.
Right.
What is it that these businesses need to see more clear? Is it the tariffs, or is it more policies coming down the pipe? Is there something else that they're looking at?
I think there's a few things that are affecting business overall, including some of what you said. But number one is rates, uncertainty around rates. Rates are still relatively high, particularly in the market where debt financing is such an important part of M&A or capital formation. And you do have these companies saying these things about more labor in the US, but it's going to take quite some time before we see that happen. By the time it might happen, somebody might reverse their decision, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
Politics has a pretty big impact because there's quite a switch from one administration to the other. We've got midterms coming up next year, and so all of these things are suspect in my opinion. It's kind of hard to stop. This labor economy for decades and decades has been built on a lot of lower cost source labor in other countries, and in a higher kind of professional labor here. And so to say we can build, all the elements of things that are built in China or Vietnam or anywhere here for the same cost is it's a pipe dream in my opinion.
Yeah, and Powell says that tariffs are higher than almost all forecasters predicted, but still doesn't know where it will come to rest. That's a question. Does it still seem that the Fed is still behind the curve, that they are lost? They said that they're not in a hurry, which I think is Fed speak for we're not going to lower rates again.
For some time. Yeah. I think that there were, I said this earlier to somebody as I was listening to Powell, it's kind of a euphemism for stagflation. He was very careful not to use that term, but he's concerned about inflation. Tariffs are kind of a catalyst for that, and yet slower growth, higher inflation. It just is not a great scenario. But yeah, I think that we could see some alleviation from this, but it's really, I think, for the time being, kind of contingent on coming back on these tariffs a little bit. That you can change the world economic order, which I think is some of the stuff coming out of the administration that I've heard, but you can't do it in a day. It's going to take a long time. And sure, we can acknowledge some pain, but we're talking about a lot of wealth destruction that's going to find its way into consumers, still 2/3 plus of the economy, and capital formation, a lot of other things that just really kind of have driven and will drive this economy again one day. But everything's sort of on a little bit of a halt. So when I talk to the leaders of our businesses, we talk about what's going on and how it's affecting them, and it's unclear. Sometimes with tariffs, it's very clear now, but mostly it's unclear. And what that means is they're concerned about making certain moves, whether it's employing people, laying off people, doing whatever it is they want to do in their business. And so there's a little bit of frozen in place, waiting for some clarity and direction.
Okay, so as the CEO and founder of Hire Capital, what is it that you want to see for clarity? I mean, you are in the forefront of hiring executives. You're one of the best in the world at doing that. And I have to ask, Paul, what is it that businesses are wanting to see, and what is it that you want to see? What clarity is it that the Fed is just asking for and begging for from the businesses? He said that the businesses are, don't have clarity right now. So, okay, you're that guy. Tell us what clarity you're looking for.
I think, every day, if you look at the last month, every day's been a different day. Maybe the last couple of days we've had a little consistency on wacky tariffs, as some people have called it. It's not my quote. And I think that policy is such a, kind of in the epicenter of what's happening. So I think businesses want to see clarity on policy, tariffs included, and they want to see things settle into an environment where they can start focusing on their businesses and not worrying about what's coming out of DC every day.
And I've heard maybe 3 or 4 times today different people saying that we're ripping the Band-Aid off. Do you feel like that's the adage of the day, or is it really what's happened, that we're ripping the Band-Aid off and we're going to see who's going to quote, I've heard this numerous times today, of bending the knee to the United States. Right. What is your thoughts behind this? I mean, yes, Vietnam looks like they have blinked. It's like the president had a good conversation with the premier there in Vietnam, because a lot of U.S. products are made in Vietnam.
Right.
But what is it that ripping the Band-Aid off seems to be just a way of covering up we have a problem and we don't have clarity out of the White House?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're breaking bones. But basically, I think there's a difference between negotiation and tariffs that kind of made reciprocal. I get it. Everybody understood that. You saw the chart the other day.
I was super excited when he said reciprocal. I thought that was a very smart move.
It started out well. In fact, I was watching in the aftermarket, and for a moment in time, he said reciprocal. Things were shooting up in the aftermarket, and then he's like, as the chart came out,
the chart out,
curved over.
Put that chart away, Mr. President.
The chart and its mathematics and implications are brutal, and
so really I'm going to ask Paul.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are you seeing? What I get concerned about too is the old Beltway bandits. Are you seeing now, while the federal government cuts, also that will have a relation to what happens in the Cohn-Resnicks of the world and the other companies that are huge, part of the world there?
That's right. Well, in the Beltway, the DC area, there's like the federal government, right, primary. You have government contractors and system integrators, secondary. And then you have all the commercial businesses that are tertiary, right? And one by one, they influence another. So the government's first, the government contractors and system integrators, from people that I've spoken with, managing partners at large Big Four firms that run public sector and businesses that manage large government contracts. This is what they said. I hate to say it out loud, but it's sort of, you ain't seen nothing yet. And what they mean is
that's what worries me. Is that's one of the reasons that I think it's so great to have you on, is that insight. So for those that understand, is while the federal government numbers are very transparent right now and easy to see, what we don't see is that DC, Maryland, Virginia is propped up by all these companies that support the federal government. And they're huge employers from the ground up. And whether it be the restaurants I used to work at or own in DC that count on these people to pay the bills because they entertain and they go and feed themselves, or all the way up to the big, like I said, the Big Four firms, as you mentioned, the Accentures, the Deloittes, the Cohn-Resnicks of the world that have thousands of analysts and consultants and things that are working within the federal government. And that's a huge sector that's hard to replace in that, especially in that 100K, that mid-manager and above, right?
That's right. And some of the numbers I've heard rolling out are, there's by the end of April, 4,000 or 5,000 here, 4,000 or 5,000 layoffs there. Delay of all the, the college grads that come in and they're hiring usually buoys the unemployment circumstance in a good way. And those are all being delayed to the beginning of next year. And who knows, I saw that. I've watched this movie before in 2008, 2009 for the poor college grads,
Right.
And it's rough out there. So uncertainty, clear reduction in spend in the federal government and all the ancillary, secondary, tertiary businesses. It's coming. I think we'll see. That's why I say in the forthcoming maybe April report, the May report, June report, that's where we're going to start to see these numbers, I think, take a different turn that may influence Powell. However, we know that tariffs could, depending upon how they wind up here, if this is truly, going to change with negotiation or not, but they wind up causing some inflation, that puts Powell in a quandary that, could lead to no rate cuts, or it could lead to one or two. We'll just see.
Yeah, we just saw the Vietnam General Secretary just a few minutes ago, and I'll post it again, just said that we agree with Trump to discuss and sign a bilateral agreement to mutually reduce tariffs to zero. Vietnam blinked. That's great. That's good news for us.
We need something like that in China, or
the EU. We need some people that buy our stuff in Vietnam. That's not, it's great for us, for Apple and for Nike and for some of those suppliers, which is, hey, we'll take any relief and good news, but it doesn't really actually help our trade deficit.
Yeah, maybe it's kind of, I don't know, low-hanging fruit. We'll go up the food chain from there.
The president said 4 times this week that he is not looking at the stock market. He is not paying attention to the market. Do you agree with that? Do you think he is or not?
Of course he is. Mm-hmm. I don't think that it is influencing him at this point in time, unless he's shorting.
I would not put it by him.
The Trump coin is exploding today. Yes, I understand.
No, I mean, I think that really there's just too much history of him talking about how measuring himself with, money and the stock market as a politician in more recent decade here. But yeah, of course he's looking at it. I do think that ultimately something along those lines, his ego and or his measure of a person, based on the market or wealth, will influence him. So,
Right.
But he also is driving forward with this plan, and I think that plan is one where, yeah, it's ripping the Band-Aid off in his opinion, and I just have to hope, right? I mean, what else can we do? We don't know, that it is truly negotiation. If it is, here's how it's going to be, and this is the new world order, put up or shut up, I think we got a lot more downside.
More downside to come. Okay. All right. So let's get past the stock market and the bad news of the day. Paul Powell, you are the CEO and you are the founder of Higher Capital. Tell us a little bit about what it is that you do and about Higher Capital. We're excited about having you on the show now. And being a contributor for us and a friend to Quasar Market. So tell us a little bit about Higher Capital and what you do.
Yeah, the business is, headquartered in the DC area, but we have resources across the country, and our focus is in executive search. And that means anybody sort of management and above for direct hire. So companies looking to, find certain resources in technology, accounting, operations, sales and marketing, and legal. That's something that we do. We also do it for contributors. We have a practice that focuses on contributors. So individual contributors, these are sort of your, 5 to 12-year folks that are great AI engineers or, fantastic accountants. And then we have a consulting practice. So, over the years, what we've discovered is as we're working on finding resources for companies, they're actually looking for people to come in on a temporary basis or a project basis. Could be one person, could be 10, could be 20. And we do that in all those domains: technology, accounting, operations, and legal. Yeah.
And how do they get a hold of you, Paul? Are you out there in the social media world?
Yeah, LinkedIn, Paul Villela, you'll find me. There's only 2. I found this dude in Minnesota. He's got my same name. We don't know each other, but we're friends, on social media. So we send each other pictures of our families and stuff. There's zero relationship.
That's great.
And we will we'll post your LinkedIn if you're okay with that out there to the public, so people can get a hold of you and get that resume over to you and hopefully find a job. You are one of the best in the world at this, so executive searching. All right, Paul Villela, I cannot wait to see you the next time and get your thoughts on what's going on in the employment world and hiring practices of businesses, because you have a very unique insight into what's going on that, as I always say, it's when you look at the markets, it's always about Main Street, not always about Wall Street. And sometimes I like to get those insights before it. And you're definitely that person to do it. So I look forward to having you on the show next time.
Thanks so much. Appreciate being here. Good to see you, Howard. Thanks, Stephen.
Good to see you guys.
Guys.